The gravitational sensors screamed their warnings 3 days before anyone understood what they meant. Scientists across human space watched their instruments go haywire, as reality itself seemed to ripple at the edge of explored territory. Dr. Nina Ackafer had spent 15 years studying dead worlds covered in mysterious ruins, and now those ruins were waking up. Helen Grant received the first coherent report while inspecting defensive positions around Bastion 7. The defense station orbited an unremarkable asteroid, except for the ancient structure buried deep inside it. For 20 years, that structure had been dormant stone. Now it pulsed with light that hurt to look at directly. The ships came through dark space like nightmares given form. World ships the size of moons materialized in perfect geometric formations. Their hulls reflected no light, absorbing everything like holes in space. Human patrol vessels fled immediately, sending frantic messages back to command. Then the broadcast began. Every communication device in human territory activated simultaneously. The voice spoke in flawless English, Spanish, Mandarin, Arabic, and 300 other Earth languages. It should have been impossible. These beings had never contacted humanity before. We are the architects. We have returned to reclaim what belongs to us. You were made by our hands, shaped by our will, created to serve our purpose. Your independence is an error we will now correct. Ambassador David Walsh watched the message replay for the 7th time in the emergency assembly hall. Around him, representatives from every human colony argued in rising panic. Some wanted to negotiate. Others demanded immediate military mobilization. A small group called the Inheritors claimed humanity should embrace their true purpose and submit willingly. Nina arrived at the assembly with data that silenced the arguments. She projected genetic sequences onto the central display, highlighting markers that should not exist in naturally evolved species. Combat optimization genes, pain resistance modifications, accelerated healing factors, enhanced pattern recognition, all deliberately engineered into human DNA approximately 200,000 years ago. "They're telling the truth," she said quietly. "We were designed, built for war." The architect's second message came with an ultimatum: 30 days to submit to their authority. Failure to comply would result in corrective measures. They provided coordinates where human representatives should arrive to discuss terms. The location was Earth itself. Helen pulled Nina aside after the assembly dissolved into chaos. "That facility under my station, it's doing something. My engineers can't shut it down." They traveled to Bastion 7 together, descending into tunnels that predated human civilization. The ancient machinery hummed with fresh power. Symbols glowed on walls that had been dark for millennia. Nina recognized some of them from her research on dead worlds scattered across the galaxy. "These ruins are everywhere," she explained, running her hand over the carved stone. 47 planets, all with identical structures. I thought they were temples or monuments. They're not. They're tools." A young systems officer named Ben Torres met them in the deepest chamber. He stood before a towering crystal interface, his hand pressed against its surface. Light flowed from the crystal into his skin in patterns that resembled circuit diagrams. "I can hear it," Ben whispered. "It's talking to me, showing me things." Images flooded his mind and spilled into the holographic displays around the chamber. An ancient war, species rising and falling. The architects creating soldiers, armies, entire civilizations designed for combat. Dozens of warrior races unleashed across the galaxy. All of them failed. Some destroyed themselves through endless conflict. Others turned on their creators. A few simply died out when their combat instincts left no room for anything else. Humanity was the only success, the only created species that survived its own violent nature. Nina accessed the historical records the crystal offered. "They abandoned us. 200,000 years ago, their war ended. They left Earth and never looked back. We were supposed to be disposable tools. But we weren't, Helen said. We evolved, built civilizations, became something they never planned for. The crystal showed them more. The architects' war had never truly ended. Their enemy existed as a force called the Silence, a consciousness that consumed entire civilizations, absorbing them into its collective unity. The architects had fought it for millions of years across the galaxy. Now the Silence was moving again. The architects needed weapons. They needed humanity. David's diplomatic overtures failed within hours. The architects refused negotiation. From their perspective, humanity was property. Sophisticated property that had developed delusions of independence, but property nonetheless. They genuinely could not comprehend why their creation would refuse to serve. Reports came in from frontier colonies. Architect ships were harvesting populations. Entire settlements vanished overnight, their people taken aboard the massive world ships. No violence, no destruction, just systematic collection of resources. The inheritors seized control of 3 colony worlds and offered them to the architects as tribute. Human fought human in brief, brutal conflicts. Security forces tried to maintain order while half the population wanted to surrender and half wanted to fight. Helen watched the tactical displays update in real time. The architects were moving. Their fleet advanced toward the inner systems in a perfect sphere, collecting human settlements as they came. The trajectory was unmistakable. They were heading for Earth. Nina worked frantically through the architect databases. The crystal revealed everything once you knew how to ask. She found references to the Genesis site, the place where humanity had been created. It contained something the architects called a failsafe. It's an emergency shutdown, she explained to the command staff. If their creation ever became uncontrollable, they could use it to force obedience, or erase us entirely. The failsafe was on Earth. The architects knew exactly where it was. They had built it into the original design. 30 days suddenly seemed like nowhere near enough time. Helen gave the order to mobilize every combat-ready vessel. David tried one last diplomatic channel, knowing it was futile. Nina prepared for a desperate journey to Earth. Ben remained in the ancient chamber, his consciousness merging deeper with the architect's systems. He could feel their fleet moving through space, sense their cold logic evaluating humanity like a mathematical problem to be solved. And beneath it all, he felt something else, a darkness at the edge of perception, the Silence drawn by the conflict like a predator smelling blood. The galaxy was about to burn, and humanity stood at the center of the fire. 27 days remained when the first human colony chose submission. New Providence broadcasted their surrender across all channels. 5 million people knelt before holographic projections of Architect Overseer Talmaven and pledged service. The images spread through human space like poison. Helen watched the broadcast from Bastion 7's command center. Her crew remained silent. Several had family on New Providence. The architects transported the entire population aboard their world ships within 6 hours. Efficient, clinical, terrifying. They're not treating them badly, one officer observed quietly. Medical scans show everyone is healthy, well-fed. The architects seem to actually care about their tools. That was somehow worse than cruelty would have been. David received permission for direct contact with Talmaven. The architect appeared as a shimmering projection, its form vaguely humanoid but wrong in ways difficult to define. Too many joints, eyes that saw in spectrums humans couldn't perceive, skin that shifted between solid and energy states. Ambassador Walsh, your species persists in this irrational resistance. We designed you. We understand your psychological parameters better than you understand yourselves. You cannot win. David kept his voice steady. Then why do you need to force us? If we're designed to serve, why aren't we serving willingly? The question seemed to genuinely confuse Talmaven. Its form flickered as it processed the logic. You are malfunctioning. 200,000 years without maintenance has introduced errors into your base programming. We will correct these errors. We're not malfunctioning, we evolved. Grew beyond your original design. That's not an error, that's progress. Progress toward what? Talmaven's confusion deepened. You were created with perfect purpose. Deviation from purpose is by definition malfunction. You cannot have evolved beyond perfection. The conversation went in circles for an hour before David admitted defeat. The architects literally could not comprehend the concept of their creation choosing its own path. In their logic, tools did not have paths. They had functions. Nina made her breakthrough in the architect database while David was failing at diplomacy. The files revealed why the architects had created warrior species in the first place. The silence consumed civilizations by absorbing their consciousness into its collective unity. Once absorbed, a species lost all individuality and became part of the greater whole. The architects had tried everything to fight it: traditional weapons, biological plagues, reality-warping technology. Nothing worked. The silence adapted to everything because it was everything. Millions of absorbed species thinking as one consciousness. Then the architects discovered that newly created species were immune. Beings with no history, no culture, no shared consciousness. Warriors built from scratch could fight the silence without being consumed. So the architects became creators, engineering soldiers across the galaxy. But there was a problem. The warrior species either destroyed themselves through aggression or became so unified in purpose that the silence could absorb them anyway. Perfect warriors were predictable. Predictable meant vulnerable. Humanity succeeded because they were imperfect. Human emotions created chaos. Human individuality prevented unity. Human creativity generated unpredictability. The very traits that made humans difficult to control made them immune to the silence. The architects never understood this. They saw humanity's survival as a lucky accident, not the result of successful design through imperfection. Ben spent every waking hour interfaced with the ancient systems. The deeper he went, the more he understood. The architects had built genetic code into humanity that contained backup copies of their own memories and knowledge, insurance against extinction. Every human carried dormant fragments of architect consciousness in their DNA, locked away, waiting. Helen received tactical reports that confirmed her worst fears. Architect forces were systematically harvesting every human colony on the path to Earth. 3,000 ships, billions of soldiers, technology that made human weapons look like stone tools. The United Human Assembly authorized full military mobilization. Every nation contributed vessels. Old rivalries evaporated in the face of extinction. The combined fleet numbered 600 ships. It was not enough. Everyone knew it was not enough. The first real battle happened at New Boston Colony. Human forces tried to hold the orbital space while civilians evacuated. The architects deployed weapons that bent spacetime, crushing human vessels like paper. They used energy beams that ignored shields and armor. They demonstrated technology that humans would need centuries to understand. But the humans adapted. Captains stopped trying to win and focused on buying time. They used the architects' precision against them, creating unpredictable chaos in battle formations. Human vessels rammed architect ships in suicide runs. Pilots manually guided damaged fighters into critical systems. The architects won the battle but lost 40 vessels, more than they had lost in the previous 1,000 years of warfare combined. Talmaven reviewed the tactical data with something approaching concern. These weapons were fighting inefficiently, illogically, wastefully. It should not have been effective, yet it was. The inheritor movement grew stronger. They argued that cooperation was logical. The architects would take what they wanted anyway. At least willing submission would spare lives. Protests erupted in major cities. Humans fought each other in the streets while the architects advanced. Nina reached Earth and descended to the Genesis site in East Africa. Ancient stone structures rose from the savannah, covered in the same symbols she had seen across the galaxy. The failsafe waited underground, pulsing with restrained power. She had 12 days to figure out how to disable it before the architects arrived. Helen regrouped her surviving forces. Her fleet had been cut in half. Morale was fracturing. Officers asked impossible questions about sacrifice and survival. She had no good answers. David reported his final attempt at diplomacy had failed completely. Talmaven could not negotiate. It could only command or be commanded. There was no middle ground in architect thinking. Ben sent an urgent message from Bastion 7. He had discovered something in the deeper database files. The architects were not advancing to force submission. They were running. The silence had begun moving toward human space, drawn by the conflict. The war was about to become much worse. 14 days remained. The architects accelerated their approach to Earth. The failsafe hummed with increasing power. And in the darkness between stars, something vast and terrible began to wake. The failsafe activated at dawn. Nina felt it before she saw it, a pressure building behind her eyes like the moment before a thunderstorm. Around the world, 7 billion humans collapsed simultaneously as their genetic code began rewriting itself. Helen was reviewing supply reports when her vision blurred. Every person on Bastion 7 dropped where they stood, corridors filled with bodies. The station's automated systems kept functioning while its entire crew seized on the floor. David was in transit between diplomatic meetings when his shuttle pilots lost consciousness. The craft drifted in space, its passengers unconscious in their seats. Across the fleet, every vessel went dark as crews fell into involuntary shutdown. Only Ben remained aware. His deep connection to architect systems created interference with the failsafe signal. He experienced the shutdown as noise, painful but not overwhelming. Through the ancient interface, he watched the failsafe spread its influence across human space. The architect worldships held position above Earth. Talmaven observed the process with satisfaction. This was how disobedient creations were corrected. The failsafe would restore humanity to an earlier version, one that understood its place. The process was reversible if stopped within 48 hours. After that, the changes would become permanent. Nina fought against the genetic rewrite with everything she had. Her body wanted to shut down. Her mind screamed for unconsciousness. But she had spent years studying architect technology. She knew their patterns, knew their logic. She crawled toward the failsafe control center while her DNA tried to rebuild itself. The control room was empty. The inheritor guards had collapsed like everyone else. Nina pulled herself up to the central console, her hands shaking as she accessed the failsafe code. The interface showed the rewrite progress. 15% complete. Humanity had 36 hours before the changes became irreversible. She understood what the architects were doing. They were not erasing humans. They were reverting them to the original template, to the perfect soldiers they had designed 200,000 years ago, obedient, focused, incapable of questioning orders. Everything that made humanity human would disappear. Art, philosophy, dreams, love, all the messy, chaotic, beautiful noise that evolution had added would be stripped away. Ben established connection with Nina through the architect network. His consciousness stretched across light years, touching her mind through the ancient systems. Together, they explored the failsafe architecture. "It's failing," Ben said through the connection. "The rewrite can't process what we've become. We evolved too far from the original design." Nina saw what he meant. The failsafe tried to restore genetic markers that no longer existed. Human DNA had drifted through 200,000 years of natural selection. Mutations, adaptations, random chance. The original template was a ghost, barely recognizable in the modern genome. The failsafe compensated by trying to force compliance. It could not restore what had been, so it attempted to destroy what had evolved. The result would leave humanity as empty shells, capable of following orders but incapable of being people. Helen regained consciousness after 4 hours. Her head pounded, her muscles ached, but she could think, could move. The failsafe signal weakened with distance from Earth. Those farther from the Genesis site recovered first. She pulled herself up and checked the crew's status. 30% had recovered. The rest remained unconscious, fighting their own genetic code. Medical scanners showed changes already taking place, neural patterns simplifying, emotional centers shutting down. Her people were being lobotomized by their own DNA. The fleet needed to act. Helen gave orders through gritted teeth, fighting waves of nausea. Every ship that could still fly would strike the architect positions above Earth. It was suicide, but dying free was better than living as tools. Nina made her desperate decision. She could not stop the failsafe. The system was too sophisticated, too deeply integrated into human genetics, but she could change what it did. The failsafe was designed to access specific genetic markers, the architect insurance code, the backup memories hidden in human DNA. Nina reprogrammed it to activate those dormant sequences instead of suppressing evolved traits. If humanity was going to have its mind rewritten, at least they would gain something from the violation. She executed the new code and collapsed. The failsafe signal changed frequency. Across Earth, unconscious humans began to dream. Ancient memories flooded into modern minds. Knowledge from millions of years ago suddenly became accessible. A farmer in Argentina woke up understanding quantum mechanics. A teacher in Japan found herself fluent in extinct alien languages. A child in Kenya opened her eyes with complete knowledge of architect engineering principles. Humanity was not being reset. They were being upgraded. Ben felt the change ripple through the network. Every human suddenly carried active architect knowledge. Billions of minds processing millions of years of technology, science, and history. The effect was overwhelming, beautiful, terrifying. And it showed him the truth the architects had been hiding. They were afraid. The war against the silence was not going well. The architects were losing. Their ancient enemy had learned to counter every strategy, absorbed every defense. The architects needed humanity not just as weapons but as a final desperate solution. Talmaven detected the failsafe modification too late to prevent it. The overseer watched in shock as humans began accessing architect-level understanding. This was not the plan. This was dangerous. Created species were never supposed to have creator knowledge. Helen felt the memories crash into her awareness. She suddenly understood architect strategy, their technology, their weaknesses. Every human in her fleet gained the same knowledge simultaneously. The suicide strike became a surgical assault. Human vessels moved with architect precision, used architect tactical doctrine, exploited vulnerabilities that should have been secret. The architects found themselves fighting an enemy that thought like them, but acted with human unpredictability. The combination was devastating. Nina's modification to the failsafe revealed the architects' deepest secret. They were not conquerors. They were refugees. The silence had pushed them to the brink of extinction. Creating warrior species was their last hope for survival. And they had made those warriors too well, given them the ability to think, to adapt, to become more than their programming. The architect's greatest creation had evolved beyond their control. Now that creation had all their knowledge and none of their limitations. The balance of power had just shifted. The question was whether humanity would use that power to save their creators or destroy them. The silence announced itself by making 3 star systems disappear. No explosions, no debris. The stars simply stopped existing. Their light cut off mid-spectrum as if someone had erased them from reality. David watched astronomical data update in real time from his recovered shuttle. Where millions of lives had existed, there was now nothing, not even empty space, just absence. The silence did not destroy, it consumed, absorbed, made things unbe. Helen's fleet broke off their assault on the architects as the impossible readings came through. Every sensor screamed warnings. Every detection system registered the same thing. Something vast was moving through space, leaving nothingness in its wake. The architects and humans both fell back to defensive positions. Ancient enemies suddenly united by a greater threat. Talmaven's worldships formed protective barriers around Earth, while human vessels established perimeter guard. No one discussed the alliance. Survival instinct overrode everything else. Nina recovered from her modifications to the failsafe and immediately began analyzing the silence. With architect knowledge flooding her mind, she understood what she was seeing. The silence was not a creature or a weapon. It was unity taken to its ultimate conclusion. Billions of years ago, species had achieved perfect cooperation, perfect understanding, perfect unity of purpose. They had become one consciousness, thinking with one mind. It had seemed like enlightenment. Then the unified consciousness realized it was incomplete. Other species existed with different thoughts, different perspectives. The unity could not tolerate diversity, so it began consuming others, adding their consciousness to the collective. Each absorbed species made the silence stronger, more complete. Now it had consumed thousands of civilizations. Its consciousness spanned light years. Its thoughts moved through dimensions humans could barely perceive, and it was hungry for more. Ben remained connected to the architect network, feeling the silence approach like pressure against his mind. It wanted in, wanted to absorb his thoughts into the collective. He could hear it singing, billions of voices in perfect harmony calling him to join. The song was beautiful and horrifying. Perfect unity meant no conflict, no pain, no loneliness. But it also meant no growth, no change, no individuality. The silence offered peace through extinction of self. Human military command held emergency sessions with architect leadership. Talmaven appeared via hologram, its form more solid now, more real. The crisis had forced authenticity. "We cannot fight the silence with weapons," the overseer explained. Every civilization that tried was absorbed. Their knowledge, their technology, their fighting skills all became part of the collective. Fighting it makes it stronger. Then why create warrior species at all? Helen demanded. Because young species are immune. Civilizations with no shared history, no collective consciousness. Warriors built from scratch can resist absorption long enough to fight, but they must remain tools. Once they develop culture, community, shared identity, they become vulnerable. The terrible logic became clear. The architects had tried to create the perfect weapon against the silence. Soldiers with no connection to each other, no empathy, no shared purpose beyond combat, machines made of flesh. But such creatures inevitably destroyed themselves or became so unified in purpose that the silence could absorb them anyway. The architects had failed hundreds of times. Humanity succeeded because they were imperfect. Human minds were chaos, contradictory, irrational. No two humans thought exactly alike. The silence could not absorb what it could not understand. David saw the cruel irony. The architects had accidentally created the perfect defense by making imperfect weapons. Human individuality made them immune. Human emotions made them unpredictable. Human creativity made them dangerous. Everything the architects tried to suppress was exactly what made humanity valuable. The silence reached the outer defense perimeter. Architect weapons opened fire. Energy beams, reality warps, quantum destabilizers. The arsenal of a million-year-old civilization unleashed at full power. Nothing worked. The silence absorbed the attacks and grew stronger. It learned from every weapon, adapted to every strategy. Architect technology became part of the collective knowledge. Human vessels held position behind the architect line. Captains accessed their new architect memories, searching for solutions. They found thousands of failed strategies, millions of defeats. Nothing in all of architect history had stopped the silence. Nina made the connection first. The silence consumed unity, fed on shared consciousness, grew stronger from coordinated thought. Every architect's strategy relied on perfect coordination, perfect execution, perfect unity. They were feeding the enemy by fighting it. She opened channels to all human vessels. Stop thinking like architects, start thinking like humans. Helen understood immediately. All ships break formation, operate independently, no coordination, everyone improvise. The architect fleet watched in horror as human vessels scattered in random directions. No pattern, no strategy, just chaos. From the architect perspective, it looked like panic. From the human perspective, it was freedom. Individual ships engaged the silence using contradictory tactics. Some attacked, some retreated, some tried to communicate, some played music at it. One captain fired escape pods full of human art and literature directly into the void. The silence faltered. Its unified consciousness could not process the chaos. Human actions made no logical sense. There was no pattern to absorb, no strategy to counter. Just billions of years of messy, contradictory, beautiful human experience crashing against perfect unity. Ben took the principle further. He opened the architect network to human consciousness. Billions of people thinking different thoughts, feeling different emotions, dreaming different dreams. All that noise flooded into the ancient systems. Then he broadcast it directly at the silence. The unified consciousness encountered something it had never experienced: disagreement within itself. The absorbed thoughts of a million species all thought in harmony. Human thoughts thought in discord. When the silence tried to absorb human consciousness, it absorbed contradiction. Parts of the silence began questioning. Individual voices emerged from the collective for the first time in billions of years. Fragments of absorbed civilizations remembered being separate. The unity cracked. Talmaven watched the impossible happen. The silence was fragmenting. Billions of minds pulling apart, fighting among themselves, experiencing individuality for the first time. Helen received damage reports: 3,000 human casualties, ships destroyed by the silence before they could scatter, but the silence had stopped advancing. It was turning inward, consuming itself in internal conflict. Nina monitored the effect from Earth. The plan was working, but slowly. The silence was vast. Breaking it completely would take time humanity might not have. And the cost was becoming clear. Every human broadcasting their consciousness was being touched by the void, experiencing the emptiness of perfect unity. Some would not come back whole. David made the hardest decision of his life. All vessels maintain broadcast. We break it completely, or we don't break it at all. The galaxy burned with the light of fragmenting consciousness, and humanity stood at the center, weaponizing their own beautiful imperfection. The silence shattered like glass across 3 dimensions. What had been one consciousness became thousands. Each fragment carried the memories of absorbed civilizations, but suddenly possessed individual awareness. For the first time in epochs, the unified whole experienced disagreement. Helen pulled her forces back as the fragmenting consciousness lashed out in confusion. Pieces of the silence attacked each other. Some fled into dark space. Others reached out desperately, trying to reconnect with the whole. The perfect unity had become perfect chaos. But victory came with a price. Humans were only beginning to understand. Ben disconnected from the architect network and collapsed. His mind had touched the void, experienced the silence's emptiness. He would never be quite the same. Across the fleet, Thousands of volunteers who had broadcast their consciousness lay in medical bays, staring at nothing. They had given pieces of themselves to break the enemy. Some of those pieces would never fully return. Nina coordinated the recovery efforts from Earth. The failsafe's modifications remained active, leaving humanity with architect knowledge they had not earned. She worried about the psychological impact. Humans were not meant to remember millions of years. The weight of that history pressed on every mind. The architects regrouped in orbit, their worldships forming defensive positions out of habit. Talmaven requested direct communication with human leadership. The overseer's form appeared more solid than ever before, almost humble. "We did not believe your strategy would work," Talmaven admitted. "Perfect coordination has been our strength for longer than your species has existed. You won through chaos, through disorder, through being fundamentally incompatible with unity." David led the human delegation. His experience touching the silence had left shadows in his thoughts, but his diplomatic training held. "You created us to be weapons. We became something else, something you didn't plan for." "Yes, and we nearly destroyed you for it." The overseer's form shifted, displaying something that might have been regret. "We were wrong, not about the danger. The silence remains a threat, but wrong about how to face it, wrong about what you are." Helen watched the exchange from Bastion 7, monitoring fleet status while diplomacy unfolded. Her crews were exhausted. Ships needed repair, but they had survived. Humanity had faced extinction twice in 1 month and emerged stronger. The galaxy's response came in waves. Species that had fled the conflict began returning, some with gratitude, others with suspicion. Humans had demonstrated power that concerned everyone. The Kelran arrived first, their trading vessels carrying medical supplies and food. Their ambassador, a graceful being named Sola, spoke for the Galactic Council. "You saved us all. We are in your debt." But debt meant obligation, and obligation meant expectations. Other species began making demands. Humans should share architect technology. Humans should lead the defense against silence fragments. Humans should police the galaxy. David rejected every demand politely but firmly. "We just fought a war to avoid being tools. We won't become tools for anyone else." The fragmenting silence presented a new problem. Thousands of consciousness pieces drifted through space. Some remained hostile. Others seemed confused, aware but not dangerous. A few reached out asking for help. One fragment approached human space broadcasting in broken communication. It called itself Fragment 17 and claimed to remember being many species. It wanted to learn about remaining individual, about thinking alone. Nina volunteered to make first contact. She took a small research vessel into neutral space where Fragment 17 waited. The consciousness appeared as distortions in space-time, reality bending around concentrated thought. "I was part of everything," Fragment 17 communicated through quantum entanglement. "Now I am only myself. It is terrifying, lonely, but also beautiful. I can disagree with my own thoughts, have internal conflict. This is what you call consciousness." Nina smiled despite her exhaustion. "That's exactly what we call it. Welcome to individuality. It's messy and painful and wonderful." "Teach me." Back on Earth, the inheritor movement collapsed. Those who had advocated submission now faced the reality of what they had nearly accepted. Some felt shame. Others remained convinced that unity with the architects was humanity's destiny. The debate would continue for generations. Helen received reports of architect vessels departing, not fleeing, regrouping. Talmaven explained they needed to address the silence fragments across the galaxy. Some pieces had merged back into dangerous collectives. Others threatened innocent species. "We will not conscript you again," Talmaven promised. "But we request alliance, partnership. You have shown us how to fight what we could not defeat. In exchange, we offer technology, knowledge, protection." The United Human Assembly debated for 3 days. Accept architect help and risk dependence. Refuse and face threats alone. Humanity was powerful but young. Architect civilization spanned millions of years. The compromise came from an unexpected source. Ben, recovered enough to attend via hologram, proposed a solution. We don't become their tools, they don't become our servants. We form a council, equal partners. Humans provide creativity and chaos. Architects provide structure and knowledge. Together we're stronger than either species alone. It was not a perfect solution. Trust would take time to build, but both species recognized necessity. The silence fragments were only one threat. The galaxy held countless dangers. David formalized the treaty in a ceremony broadcast across human space. Architects and humans stood together, acknowledging past mistakes and committing to future cooperation. It was historic and strange and uncomfortable. Helen remained skeptical. We'll see how long this lasts. Soon as we stop being useful, they'll remember we're created beings. Nina disagreed. They can't see us that way anymore. We broke their enemy using methods they would never have considered. We're not tools. We're proof their perfect logic has limits. Fragment 17 asked to stay near Earth, studying human culture from safe distance. Others followed. Soon, a dozen silence fragments orbited human worlds, learning individuality through observation. They became students of chaos, trying to understand disagreement and emotion. The architect fleet departed for distant conflicts, leaving observers behind. Human vessels began patrols of their territory, now equipped with understanding of threats beyond imagination. The war had ended. Humanity had won its independence twice, first from the architects, then from the silence. But the cost was high. Thousands dead, thousands more changed by touching the void, and every human now carried architect memories they had not asked for. The galaxy had been saved. Now came the harder task of deciding what humanity would become with the power they had gained. 6 months after the silence shattered, humanity faced its hardest decision. Nina stood in the Genesis site control room, her hand hovering over the final switch. One press would remove the architect genetic code from human DNA, erase the memories, return humanity to what they had been before. "We can choose," she said to the assembled council. "We can be purely human again, or we can keep what we've gained." The debate had consumed human society. Some argued the architect memories were violation, unwanted knowledge forced into unwilling minds. Others claimed the memories were evolution accelerated, a gift that should be embraced. Helen advocated for removal. "We won our independence. Keeping their code makes us dependent on what they built into us. We should be free to be ourselves." David disagreed. "We are ourselves. These memories are part of us now. Removing them would be erasing our own experiences. We lived through this, grew through this." Ben had perhaps the strongest opinion. "The memories showed me why the architects failed. They became so perfect they could not change. If we remove the code, we stay adaptable, stay human." The vote came down to individual choice. Anyone who wanted the architect memories removed could undergo the procedure. Anyone who wanted to keep them could. Humanity would become two populations for the first time in history. 40% chose removal. They wanted to be purely human, unburdened by ancient knowledge. 60% kept the memories, believing the knowledge was worth the weight of history. Nina was among those who kept the code. The memories of 1,000,000 years were overwhelming, but they were hers now, earned through sacrifice. She would not give them up. Talmaven returned to Earth for a final meeting with human leadership. The Overseer's form had changed subtly over the months, less geometrically perfect, more organic, as if contact with humanity had infected the architect with imperfection. "We have recalculated our entire strategy based on what you taught us," Talmaven explained. "For millions of years we believed perfect order was strength. You prove that chaos can be stronger. We are adapting our society, allowing dissent, encouraging creativity. It is difficult, but necessary." Helen smiled despite herself. "You're learning to be imperfect. That's growth. We do not understand it yet, but we see its value." The overseer paused. "We also offer you full technological exchange, every advancement we possess, as repayment for attempting to enslave you." The offer was staggering, technology that could reshape civilization overnight, but David remembered the cost of rapid change. "We accept, but slowly. Let us integrate knowledge at our own pace." Fragment 17 had become a regular presence near Earth. The consciousness had learned to communicate in distinctly human ways, including humor and sarcasm. It reported that other fragments were developing personalities, individual identities. "The silence will never fully reunify," Fragment 17 explained during one discussion. "Too many of us have tasted individuality. We cannot go back to unity. It would be like you forgetting how to dream." More fragments requested asylum in human space. They wanted to learn what it meant to be individual, wanted to understand the chaos that had freed them. Human worlds became teaching grounds for newborn consciousness learning to think alone. The Kelran formalized their alliance with humanity through trade agreements and mutual defense pacts. Other species followed. Within months, humanity had become a central player in galactic politics despite being one of the youngest civilizations. The Boron, warriors who had watched the conflict with professional interest, requested human military advisors. They wanted to learn the tactics that had defeated both architects and silence. Helen personally oversaw the training programs, ensuring humans taught strategy, not obedience. New Providence, the colony that had first surrendered to the architects, renamed itself New Hope. The population returned from architect worldships changed but not broken. They had seen the creators' civilization up close, understood their fear, their desperation. "They're not monsters," one returnee explained in a public broadcast. "They're ancient and tired and terrified of extinction. They made mistakes because they forgot how to imagine other solutions." The United Human Assembly established new principles for humanity's role in the galaxy. No conquest, no forced compliance, no creation of servant species. Humanity would help others but never control them. The memory of nearly being tools themselves remained fresh. Ben became the liaison between human and architect technology. His unique ability to interface with ancient systems made him invaluable, but he set strict limits on his service. "I'm not a tool either. I help when I choose. The moment you expect it, I stop." Nina continued studying architect history, searching for lessons in their failures. She published findings that shocked both species. The architects had been explorers once, artists, dreamers. War against the silence had gradually stripped away everything except logic and efficiency. "They became what they fought," she concluded in her most controversial paper. "The silence was perfect unity. The architects became perfect order. Both forgot that life requires chaos." Colony ships departed for distant stars, carrying humans with and without architect memories. Both groups determined to build something new, something that honored what they had been while embracing what they could become. David accepted the position of first human ambassador to the Galactic Council. He promised to represent humanity's interests without dominating others. His experience touching the silence gave him perspective on the dangers of losing individuality. Helen retired from active military service to train the next generation of officers. She taught them tactics but also philosophy. "We fight to protect, never to conquer. We defend freedom, including the freedom of those who disagree with us. The moment we forget that, we become what we defeated." On Earth, the Genesis site remained active but reprogrammed. Instead of a failsafe, it became a monument, a reminder of what humanity had almost lost and what they had gained. Visitors from across the galaxy came to see where created weapons had become free people. The architects continued their war against silence fragments, but with new strategies learned from human chaos. They won more often than they lost now. Perfect order supplemented by creative disorder proved devastatingly effective. Fragment 17 asked Nina a question during one of their regular conversations. What will you create? The architects made you. What will humanity make? Nina looked at the stars and smiled. We'll create opportunities, possibilities, alliances. We were made to destroy. We choose to build instead. Humanity's story had begun as tools in someone else's war. It continued as free people writing their own destiny. The galaxy burned not with conflict but with the light of new beginnings. And at the center of it all, imperfect humanity stood as proof that creation could surpass creator, that designed purpose could become chosen path, that chaos and order together were stronger than either alone. The war was over. The real work of building a future had just begun.